Welcome to your Get That Nugget for GCSE English Literature. Today we're going to be concentrating on looking at how structure and plot development affect the meaning of the story and how we can write about that. Today we're going to focus on A Christmas Carol so that you can answer the essay question in paper 1 of your English Literature GCSE. This session is here to complement your lessons with your teacher and in no way to replace them. So Christmas Carol has a fairly standard narrative that progresses through Scrooge's redemption story. We get the rising tension throughout as we get closer and closer to Scrooge's redemption. We have the establishing of the norm at the beginning with Scrooge's behaviour. And then we have that moment at the end where he is redeemed, where he recognises all his ills and he changes as a human being. So at its core, Christmas Carol is a redemption tale. It's also a morality tale. But what Dickens did was to split it up into staves, not chapters, not sections, not acts, but staves. There are 5 staves within A Christmas Carol, which reflects the 5 staves in a musical bar. And Dickens did this in order to remind us of Christmas carols, in order to make it a more sort of musical, lyrical story. And what we're going to look at is how we move from stave 1 to stave 5 and how we get that redemption. And stave 1 is all about setting up Scrooge as an irredeemable character, all about setting Scrooge up as someone who is cruel and cannot be changed. So stave 1 sets up Scrooge's character. So within that stave we are introduced to his nephew who comes to ask him to visit for Christmas. Scrooge says no. We are introduced to Bob Cratchit, who asks for a little bit of extra coal and a little bit more money, and Scrooge says no. And so we already have quite a negative view of Scrooge. And Dickens does this because you have to set up a character to be redeemed, otherwise there is no redemption story. And so we really get the worst of Scrooge in that stave. He is then visited by Marley's ghost. And at this point, we and Scrooge get to see what the future will look like if no change happens. And to be really clear, this idea of the supernatural coming and adapting the way that Scrooge thinks, adapting Scrooge's sort of perception, is slightly unusual because it sort of hovers around the idea of the supernatural, which was not necessarily aligned with Christianity. However, Marley comes, tells him that he wants to help him, tells him that he wants to stop him from going down the same path, and that he will be visited by 3 spirits. Scrooge dismisses this. At this point, he is still incredibly logical, incredibly cynical. There is no wonder, there is no imagination in him. He is almost sort of cold and shallow. There is no depth to him. And then in stave 2, we have the arrival of the ghost of Christmas past. And that ghost takes him to visit several places. The first place is Scrooge's childhood. We see maybe why Scrooge is the way he is. We see maybe why Scrooge lacks the ability to connect with humans because he is isolated from his family. We then see Scrooge as a young man working at Fezziwig's. And we see Fezziwig as a direct contrast to Scrooge. We see him as a direct contrast to the Scrooge that we know. So a man who's running a business, who can make his employees feel good, who make his employees happy, and who is willing to spend money on them and do nice things for them. We also see Belle, and we see Belle break off her engagement to Scrooge because she is concerned that he values money more than her, and Scrooge does not correct her. So at this point, Scrooge's priorities are incorrect, but that rejection by Belle also begins to affect him as a person and begins to affect the way he treats people. At the end of that stave, Scrooge is emotional. He has started to tap in to emotion. And so when the Ghost of Christmas Present arrives and starts to show him the world around him, the experience is different for Scrooge. He is here with a more open mind, and we are not all the way. Scrooge is not fixed. He has not yet had the full journey. He's not yet had the full redemption. But he sees the Cratchits and he sees the state that they're living in. And he knows that he has the ability to change that. He sees his nephew Fred and he sees the way that they talk about him. And he sees that even though he has not been particularly nice to Fred, Fred defends him. So he also sees various other Christmas time scenes. He sees people who are isolated. He sees people who are sharing Christmas. And finally, we get the two children, Ignorance and Want, who are symbolic of Victorian society, who essentially are there to represent the poor and the children, and they are the people that need the help, and unless we do something about it, ignorance and want will take over society. So by the end of stage 3, we really are almost there. Scrooge has changed. He's not the same cold, shut down person he was. He's starting to recognise that there is a world around him, and he's starting to want to make connections with people. But ultimately, the change hasn't really been embedded yet, and it's only with the third spirit, Christmas Yet to Come, that we are certain that that change has been embedded. Scrooge is shown the funeral of a dead man, and before he is even in the ground, thieves have stolen everything from his accommodation, and no one is there to mourn for him. So not only are there no mourners, but the dead man has been disrespected by thieves. He also then witnesses the death of Tiny Tim because there was no one there to support Tiny Tim. There was no one there to help financially. And there is a guilt to that. So Scrooge feels sad for the man who has died with no mourners, sad for the man who has no one to protect him, look after his stuff, look after his legacy, no one to care when he's dead. He then also feels an immense amount of guilt at the death of Tiny Tim. And then finally, we are taken to the gravestone of the man who had no mourners, the gravestone of the man who had been stolen from, and the gravestone is uncared for. And as he gets closer Scrooge realises that that is his gravestone. And it is that realisation that he will leave the world as rich as he may be now, as much as he is miserly and money grabbing now, and he can have lots and lots of money. None of that is being used by him, none of that is helpful to him, and none of that will secure a legacy for him or fond memories of him when he is gone. And it is at this point that that redemption finally happens. Scrooge wakes in his own bed in Stay 5, having been all around the place to see lots of different things. And when he wakes up, he decides that he is absolutely going to change his ways, and he's absolutely going to change everything. So he goes to see the Cratchits, he goes to see Fred, he gives money to charity, and suddenly all of the things that have been pointed out to him as being negative, all of the things that were negative about his character and completely against what we now recognise as the spirit of Christmas, are all turned on their head, and Scrooge himself essentially becomes the spirit of Christmas. He embodies what it is to be goodwill to all men. He embodies what it is to be a good Christian citizen. But what we cannot do is get to this redemption point without all of these stages. So we unpick Scrooge, we see where he got to. We see the effect that he has on people around him. We see the impact of his actions on how he is remembered. And finally, he is redeemed. So the question you need to answer, and it's about 2 paragraphs: how does Dickens use structure to present Scrooge's redemption? Once you've written down your ideas, please do hand it to your teacher, and I'm sure they'll be happy to mark it for you.